Yeah, I mean, I've heard so many stories about teams recently. I heard that Sindarov's team was discovered by, I'm not going to say who, but another candidate. Everyone who was part of that team was discovered because they accidentally ended up at the same location for a training camp, 2 teams at the same time. So these things, they happen. You just got to get on with it in the end. And I mean, it's all noise. It will come down to kind of form at the time. Openings will be a big thing, but it comes down to who's in best form. And I think Gukesh working on the form is the main thing, regardless of what Sindarov thinks of him, regardless of who's on each team. You can have Kaimo, you can have all the openings in the world, but you need to be in good form.
Right, and talking about good form, we heard in the confessional that Gukesh pretty confident about his position. We were not sharing his confidence. We thought, well, just a pawn down.
Every time we've had Gukesh in the confessional, the one word that he uses a lot, which I think also gives away of his mindset and the way he approaches chess, is that it's an interesting position, and you always see him very happy with that evaluation. And we use the word interesting a lot in chess, and what it really just means is that it's a position that you can fight in. It's not that equal. There's no clear path to taking this to an Armageddon. I've got a game, and sure, I'm down a pawn, but I believe in my chances, and I think the chances that he was referring to, and David, maybe we just show that one more time, because he highlighted the move knight d2 as the one where he felt that Alireza could have gone in with something stronger. He was talking about the idea of bishop c7, that Gukesh here was fearing the bishop gets out of the way, and then white not only has an extra pawn, but also a bishop pair in this position. But instead, knight d2, and Gukesh was relieved to see that on the board. He immediately snaps up the bishop, as we saw happen, moves his king, lines up the rook on b8, and now he said what he's really looking forward to is getting that a5 move in, trying to open up the a line. And David, bishop d1, it still looks like a pawn sacrifice to me. I do see that there are ideas of rook coming onto the second rank, maybe rook to a8, but there's a c6 weakness on the board as well that's being hit currently. So what exactly did Gukesh mean, and how does he plan to execute a5?
Great question. I've been wondering as well. I think whichever way the black rook goes, a8, b2, we probably end up at the same thing, rook to b2. This gives white an extra option, however, of bishop to b3, shutting the door. I think the intention would be bishop to d3, and that's why we see the eval bar drop, the rook coming into e2. So most likely it kind of goes in the same direction. Knight takes c6, rook takes pawn. We could have got this via the rook a8 move order. And the question is, like, what is black really threatening? White could, at the very least, castle. Maybe there are other ways, but even if white just castles, it's still a pawn. Actually, it's 2 pawns now. And that's quite a big investment. He doesn't go for a5 because he didn't see the compensation here. Rook to c8 instead played. I guess it's just to defend c6, so the a5 more attractive, more appealing. But this is where Gukesh is, in my eyes, unique. Most of us would be more general terms. We'd like, oh wait, we're a pawn down, can't play this. Like, we're only playing for survival, only playing for a draw. But he, as you said, Tanya, he doesn't look at general terms. He thinks hardcore specifics, so concrete. I have this line, bang, 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 bang. At the end, I'm fine. This line, I'm fine. This line, I'm fine. Who cares if he's a pawn down? He's not materialistic like that.
No, and I think those specifics are still around the move a5. I think this completely hints at it, right? You put your rook on c8, you defend that c6 pawn, and you're going there next. The big question for me, Jovanka, is does Alireza have time to strike to get to the party first with a c4 break of his own?
That indeed looks very, very tempting as well, just to strike while the iron's hot, because otherwise, as you guys mentioned, a5 incoming, get active. I think if it's now or never, if he wants to do it.
Should we put it to test by fire?
Let's quickly put it to death, to test.
And then put it to death, probably, because it's okay.
It's okay.
No, yeah, the reason I want to be quick with this one, because there's a lot of stuff happening in the other games.
This is going to go on for a while.
But we can quickly analyze this one. What is wrong with c4? Because the evaluation bar kind of said no.
Yeah, I think it's either c4 or it's bishop c2. Alireza's last move was bishop d1. I think his intention is to challenge the black bishop, but c4, yeah, I mean, the big question is what happens if black just continues, I guess, with his plan that he's dictated. I'm not 100% keen on taking on d5, partly because the black knight could jump, although I suddenly realized there's a pawn hanging on the edge of the board, but mainly because black can continue, and apparently this is a mistake. And yeah, maybe just too slow. Maybe white just takes the pawn, gets castled. Yeah, maybe this is the way forward. I would have actually played bishop c2 just because I suddenly see, okay, very least after a5, I can probably do anything here, castle, f3, but the white knight's going to leap forward, and I'm just shocked that the eval bar says it's only a small edge for white. Clear pawn.
Is it a3 in this position here? Just hoping to get that rook double up first or go directly on b2? I was thinking maybe double up first, but then it gives you a really nice stronghold on b2 at some point.
No. I mean, it's crazy, the eval bar changing every move. Like, whatever I play, it's changing. But it does look like white is the one having the fun.
Yes, exactly. And, okay, so really interesting position, but it's getting critical for both sides. I want to direct us first to Zhu Jin against Zhu Wenjun, because Tanya, your move was put into operation with getting a king to f5. And Zhu Wenjun, you can see the evaluation bar saying she's managed to find a resource because she sacrificed her rook, sacrificed the exchange, in order to get rid of that really powerful bishop.
Yeah, and I'm just gonna go, Ivanka, that was an idea mentioned by you, man. Well done on that. That's the resource that was found by Zhu Wenjun. And look at that, the bar says that black has play right now. And David, you're going to show us how she exactly did it. But it just showed how desperate it was for Wenjun to go for this. And it was the best way to get counterplay in this position. Under 10 minutes though now.
Exactly, under 10 minutes. And Ivanka, I have a feeling it's your day with the prediction game in general, because you called it that Pragg would play a French. You called it that Rook E2 would happen. Zhu Jin really took her eye off the ball here. I'm frankly shocked by her decision. Like, White's plan is to put the king on f5. White's plan is to, at some point, push the h-pawn, g-pawn. Why not start with a move like rook g1 or h4? She plays bishop c4, inviting black's only source of counterplay. This is literally the only thing black can do, and she's allowed rook to e2. Yes, it's a sacrifice. Maybe she just totally missed it, but now c2, impossible to hold. h2 also hanging, and that's how we got to the live position. And rook c3, a difficult move. But just for everyone at home, she should be playing this here and now before white gets time to consolidate, because taking the rook would actually lose the game for white, and you can't stop the pawn now advancing and coming forward. So Zhu Wenjun back in the game if she finds rook c3.
Back in the game if she finds rook c3, but it is a big if. She has to offer up a trade of rooks. Things are also looking incredibly sharp in the game between Divya Deshmukh and Bibisara. Oh, she doesn't find. We just caught a glimpse there. The rook to e2 was the move played, and Zhu Jin back in the driving seat. But it seems really wild between Divya and Bibisara.
Yeah, let's jump over to that. We left it last with Divya having that extra pawn and felt like she's going to push this for the win in this one. I do see that last move by Bibisara has been king sidestepping a check. And look at that, Divya is giving back her pawn for piece activity, jumps forward with her knight to d5, gets awarded an exclam on the board, but queen takes pawn. Get that pawn back, material balance restored. What is Divya's follow-up?
Wow, that is a big pawn to give back. She could have defended it with her rook, with a queen maybe, but knight d5. Okay, it must be something forcing some concrete lines. I mean, Bibisara has to take the pawn. Otherwise, it steps to c7. She can resign. She's never getting rid of that pawn in conjunction with the white knight. Beautiful outpost. Okay, queen takes pawn. Maybe we'll break it down. Bibisara has a lot of time, so she might think, but she will play this move eventually.
She does it instantly. Like you said, just can't allow c7 on the board. And now the big question, has Divya calculated this through? And the blue arrow to the rescue, b4, hitting the bishop, getting it out of there, and then stepping up with the... Look at that, Divya does it. She finds the best move in the position. And I was going to say, do you follow this up with a move like rook a6, targeting the d6 pawn next?
And black has to choose where to go first. Bishop to d4 might just get hit by a move like c3, and if the bishop takes the pawn, whoops, you get pinned. And white here wins the bishop next move. So after b4, more likely the bishop drops back, and Tanya, you're wanting to put the rook on this square, pinning.
It's more attractive after the bishop falls back to b6, although I'm still surprised with the pawn giving up of the pawn. I'm trying to think, what's our follow-up here as white? You're not going to win that bishop instantly anyway.
That's true, but you've got a lovely little bind, right? You've got c4, c5 coming.
Queen d5, c4, if you try to unpin yourself.
Exactly. Not getting away there. And actually, the more I look at it, the more I'm thinking, well, black is in a huge tangle.
You can't actually ever break the pin.
That's true.
That's weird. Like, you can't get out of this. You can't move your queen to b7. You drop the bishop. Queen b5, c4. Like, this is the perfect construction. Let's say black makes a random move. You can still play c4. Since the black queen cannot take the pawn, the bishop will hang at the end.
That's a beautiful idea by Divya, to give up the pawn for this play against the black bishop.
Wow. Incredible. She's so good in these kind of unorthodox, imbalanced positions.
And the thing is, right, you're going to be forced back to go to b6. You can start with d4, but the bishop's getting hit there anyway. So the pin is inevitable on the board right now.
It is inevitable. Yes, I mean, how to get out of that one? I don't see it.
Thanos also said he was inevitable, but we all knew how that turned out. In the meantime, people getting very excited here in the library. We're hearing some players cheering, or some fans cheering for the players.
That can only mean one thing, David Howell.
There's action on some of the boards, but we will jump to the other action in a second. There we go, bird's eye view. Just to mention, Divya against Bibisara, that was the final game, final round of the candidates. Bibisara needed to beat Divya with black to qualify for a playoff for the World Championship match. She wasn't able to do so. So Bibisara, maybe some revenge on her mind as well. But right now, I think it should be survival she's focused on.
She needs to survive a very difficult position as she plays an inspired Divya. And we can see on the top right, there is an Armageddon coming just around the corner. In just a few minutes, we will have a kickoff between Wesley So and Vincent Keimer. Wesley So with the white pieces against a luckless Vincent, I would say, in Armageddon.
And how long will you be unlucky for? You know, 7 is the lucky number for some people. This is his 7th Armageddon, so maybe those fortunes will reverse, with colors reversed as well. But meanwhile, a lot of moves on the board next to that, right? We see our evaluation across on the bottom row there. Advantage Divya, advantage Eugene, Muzichuk, Humpy in the balance. Top row, I think we have to head back to Magnus versus Praggnanandhaa. A lot of moves have happened. A pair of rooks are off the board. Praggnanandhaa still up a pawn, and some light square weaknesses as well for Magnus Carlsen.
That's right. Just a very quick action replay. We left it after queen to g7. The rook did slide up to the 7th rank, and Pragg had a couple of choices here. He could have pushed forward the e5. He chose to play a bit more refrained. Rook f7, but now the chance does disappear because Magnus found a better twist on something we were looking at earlier. f4 first, here and now, without getting greedy, without grabbing a pawn, before the black rooks are able to double up, because now black cannot take this pawn despite the g-file pin because of a deflection. Rook takes d7, the black queen goes away, and white is able to take the rook up a piece. So after rook to f8, we see Magnus drop back with his king. No more pin on the g-file, the pawn's untouchable. There's a bind in the center. Pragg does defend everything. He doesn't go to e6 because this pawn may be vulnerable after some exchanges. Instead, after rook takes f7, he does take with the bishop, and now Magnus sliding across, taking the open file. Pragg chooses to create some threats. Bishop f3, a bit of a scary one.
And you know which other threat is super scary here? Rook takes pawn. David immediately combining the idea of bishop f3. And I was just wondering, has Pragg blundered that pawn on e6 because it's hanging? I'm glad you have the checkmate on the board. But now if Magnus was to grab the pawn on e6, I think Pragg does the same. Maybe you start with the check, but just to be a little bit more flashy, I'll go rook takes pawn here, setting up a checkmate.
Wow.
Nice shot there. Can't take the rook because of bishop f3 checkmate. The queen can block, but the inevitable is there.
But the power says white's fine, so there's something else here.
Could it be? I mean, rook e5 doesn't work because of a check first, and then I guess rook takes f4, although there's some calculation to be done. Rook takes e6, very natural. If white wants to play it safe, maybe the queen can come and, I don't know, defend some squares, but that looks very passive.
Can I suggest a move? Rook takes pawn, if you're Magnus. Rook takes pawn, if you don't give the check first.
Sure.
Bishop takes pawn. I want to trade the queens and win your rook.
Exactly, all the deflections. Queen takes now would be a huge blunder because the rook falls at the end. This is Tanya's point, but after bishop takes h7, I guess the king hides in the corner.
Yep.
I hate the ball. I hate it. I thought bishop takes pawn, it's going to go all the way up.
Yeah, well, rook e8 is impossible because of the bishop standing there on h5. Everything is covered, and you can't, of course, give a check with the queen because now king takes bishop, or even rook.
Yeah, king takes bishop, even better. Piece up for black. So this could easily spiral out of control, and I mean, I hate talking about it so much, but the clock Magnus burning so much time in the opening. He's down to 11 minutes. This is just move 23. And I know some of our viewers aren't keen on us talking about the increment, but I mean, it's purely 11 minutes now for the next 17 moves. Beyond that, Magnus will get 10 seconds per move, but does he get that far? That's the big question. Let's go check out the Armageddon in the meantime.
Yeah, no extra time on this one until move 40. The Armageddon started. Vincent Keimer with the black pieces. The draw means he wins the match for Wesley, so he's going to be looking for that must-win, for that 1.5 pointer here, Jovanka, and we start with a Queen's Indian defense, a Nimzo Indian that's sort of converted into Queen's Indian setup, with black getting ready to fianchetto his bishop on b7.
Yep. And bishop to d2, played by Wesley, designed just to fight against the bishop takes knight, just crippling the white queenside pawn structure. So usually black is playing d5 at some point, but in comes a knight, knight e2, keeping the structure flexible. Knight can jump to f4 to g3.
What do you guys think? Is 7 the lucky number for Keimer?
Oh, like you said, Tanya, 7, it's a magical number, right? Like, I mean, Harry Potter, it was all about 7 books, 7 Horcruxes. My lucky number is 14, double 7. And yeah, there's something magical about it. Like, it feels like Vincent's run has to end at some point. Also, Wesley has to switch gears. Wesley has to win. Earlier, he was playing all out for a draw in the classical. Now he's playing all out for a win. That change could unbalance him. I think the fact that Vincent doesn't need to win this game might help him a little bit. He's been closer in the Armageddons with black than he has been with white.
007 for a reason.
Exactly.
The name is Vincent Keimer.
Okay, and in the meantime, Jovanka was right. D5 did come. Pieces now coming forward. Black's getting ready to play the move c5, breakout maybe in the near future. This is a very tense position, but Wesley at least showing that, there we go, bishop dropping back. Wesley showing that he does want a longer battle. He will be trying to play against the clock later.
And it's very interesting, this type of maneuver that Wesley's done with the knight, because usually a knight comes to f3 and then jumps onto e5, Wesley clearing his throat. It's just quite nice, actually, that we are really getting that feeling of being live there in the tournament hall.
And there's not going to be clarification in the position. I think this is the sort of a long game opening approach that you have, where there's no clear path to trading off too many pieces, not too many open lines. If you give up the bishop for the knight, which already Vincent does, it's the first imbalance created already. The queen moves over. Wesley can also think about, if he's super ambitious, David, to go alongside castle, start pushing h4, g4, g5, and go for the attack on the right side.
Vincent gave up the bishop pair, trading off a bishop for knight, so he's trying to get rid of Wesley's better bishop, the light squared bishop. White's dark squared bishop right now a bit stuck, so a very logical move. And this is decision time. Either Wesley allows that exchange and plays very positionally, or he drops that bishop back, accepts that he will not castle through the black bishop's gaze here on the diagonal, and he's going long.
He's going to do that. He's going to do that. Bishop c2, and Tanya, you called it g4, h4. Have all the fun in the world.
G4, H4, G5, H5, everything 5, and go long castle, and you're very set for it, especially in an Armageddon. It's on the board. This is going to be a fun battle for Vincent Keimer. He already strikes at the center. The knight will come out next. Looking for the rooks to line up against the white king if you're Keimer. Wow, Wesley gives a clear target. A hook at the position, the a3 pawn, b5, b4 in the agenda, but he had to stop the knight from getting to that square.
Oh, this is going to be such a fascinating middle game ahead. I would say the stakes are higher for Keimer just because now he's got pretty much only half of Wesley's time on the clock, but also he needs to attack before it's too late. Wesley's got so many easy improving moves. He's going to slide his king across to b1, maybe f3, g4, all the pawns flying forward. Vincent is less clear, less straightforward, therefore more difficult. Number 7, the Armageddon hell that he's been in, the limbo. Can he turn it around? He moves his rook.
He lines it up against the white king, take a pause, sidestep, puts the king on the safe square, and setting up g4, g5 next is Wesley. So, do you trade on d4? Do you keep the tension if you're Vincent Keimer?
Yeah, do you also attack the queen and, you know, try to force the queen on f4 to a more inconvenient square?
Knight h5?
Knight h5 is a move to consider, but it's risky. Rook e8. G4 now.
G4 possible. Wesley type of move might be f3 just to cover the light squares, stop any black knights appearing in the center. Although g4 is so tempting. There we go.
G4 if you're Wesley, so it's on the board. G5 coming in next.
Suddenly it's looking very difficult for Vincent. He gives white an isolated pawn, but there we go. The consequence of not controlling that square means Vincent has some activity. If we see a bunch of exchanges in the center, maybe the white d-pawn will also drop.
And I'm also looking for ideas for Wesley here. You know, you've got the bishop pair. You want to try to open the position, David. We might see a trade on the board. The d-pawn moving forward. The bishop lined up on c3, eyeing the king side. As Vincent looks up. Just under 4 minutes for Keymer. And a rich tactical position.
Wesley, I don't think he should have allowed this, at least in practical terms. Eval Bar says he's still better, but suddenly Vincent has light at the end of the tunnel. He could exchange off a bunch of pieces. At least the clarity that he gets with this last knight jump will help him to make moves quickly.
And Wesley's analyzing, Ivanka, what happens after grabbing everything on e4? d4 is hanging, those complications, who does it benefit at the end?
I think Wesley is absolutely forced to take that knight on e4. I don't think he can just dilly-dally and allow black to capture the bishop on d2. So what I'm expecting after all of the trades, in answer to your question, Tanya, I'm expecting some kind of consolidating move. Either the bishop steps to e3 or maybe to c3 in order to bulldoze the center with a d5.
Yeah, but Wesley slowed down because it's no longer one-sided traffic, and calculation is necessary. What to do? I agree that he should be taking this knight, but the follow-up, there's a lot of choice there. And okay, we'll find out. Wesley with a think now speeds up, brings his rook to e1.
And you don't want to capture that pawn at the center of the board with your knight walking into pins on the d line, then the bishop and the rook combining to hit that. And the best move on the board, knight to e5. That is a stunner, but also probably the most non-human move in this position. It's nowhere in your radar.
Never, ever, ever, ever.
What kind of
Another
move is
ever.
that? Absolutely.
It's a crazy sacrifice. For anyone wondering at home, it's because the black rook would then, if the knight is captured, take the bishop on c2, trying to draw out the white king, where it would get checked by the black bishop and other pieces, knight to e5. If Vincent finds that, he deserves this Armageddon win. And I don't think it's possible, though. Especially not in a situation where you only have 3 minutes on the clock.
The thing is, unless this is a practice exercise and someone says black to play, you're not even considering that move right now. No one's tapping you on your shoulder saying there's something special. It's not in your candidate move list currently if you're Keymer. Also, with under 3 minutes on the clock, never, ever, 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 ever. Knight e5 not happening. Knight takes pawn not possible with bishop c3, bishop e3 ready to go on that. But look at that, Vincent getting a bit nervous. He's trying to will himself to make a move right now.
The move he wants to play is bishop to d3. There we go. He will trade off bishops at least, clarifying things further. But the problem is at the very end, Wesley gets this move. Without this move, black could have maybe set up a light squared blockade, but now the white bishop's going to be a glorious piece on the c3 square, and g7 is the target.
And unchallenged for the rest of the game, right? With d3, not an asset but a liability right now for Keymer. That pawn's about to fall. d5 meanwhile stepping up. Kingside attack as well. Wesley still making this look pretty smooth so far.
Yeah, and there's no counter-attacking possibilities for Vincent. If he swoops in with a queen to e2, that's simply going to be met with rook to e1.
And you can see the tension on Wesley. He doesn't know what piece to pick, what piece to put on the side. Hand shaking there.
He's always been a very fidgety opponent, Wesley. I've played him many times myself. He's always clearing his throat when he gets nervous. He's always playing with pieces. But ultimately, that isn't something that Vincent Keymer can worry about. Vincent needs to think about the clock. He's just too slow. He's only got 1.5 minutes left. He's 5 minutes behind Wesley in an Armageddon. This is verging on hopeless. He needs to make quick moves in a difficult position. He needs to survive somehow.
A position that's only about to get more and more difficult for the black pieces. Right now for Wesley, the moves come easy and quick. Bishop lining up next, the d3 pawn about to fall. Threats against the g7 pawn. Vincent, make a move. You're falling under a minute right now.
And they're only on move 22, so plenty more moves until that 40 move.
And that's not a move you want to make after that long think. Retreating with the knight, allowing the d pawn to move further with momentum. d6, but instead Wesley lines up, gets ready for bishop c3. Attacking this d3 pawn as well.
Cemento.
Cementing, yeah, I was going to say bishop on c3, and there would be a battery against g7. The D3 pawn. That is so vulnerable. And Vincent desperately trying hard, but you can just begin with bishop to c3. Set up that checkmating idea.
Vincent will spot that one. He blocks with his pawn. But advantage gone for Wesley So. Apparently a mistake. He might have needed to push forward with d6 first. There were some small, subtle differences. Maybe the white bishop actually had to go the other way to f4 to defend its pawn. Suddenly after d6, the black knight goes to c8 to hit that pawn, win that pawn. And he might be escaping Vincent Keimer, at least on the board.
And there's no time to get g5 in, trying to break on f6, as d5 is under pressure currently. And for Wesley So, win is the only outcome that works. A draw means Vincent Keimer takes the match. If both the d-pawns disappear, Vincent gets closer to that draw.
So Wesley, bearing in mind Vincent's clock time, is thinking how to be tricky. Should he advance the pawn to d6, attack the knight? Should he be setting up rook to e1? He goes for d6, knight c8, and your idea, Tanya, just open up the diagonal.
Keimer's ready with his response. He better be. He's around the 30-second mark right now, attacking the queen. You can give a check, but Vincent can block it with his own queen. Offering a queen trade, up a pawn right now is Keimer.
Vincent's almost out of danger now on the board. He's getting closer to a drawn endgame. He looked up at the screen to check the move count. But yeah, Wesley, guilty of exactly what he was doing yesterday. Wesley, as soon as the opponent's in time trouble, begins to rush. Bishop c3 was a rush decision when he had over 6 minutes on the clock. He might be starting to regret it now. He has to win it all over again. The hard work only begins now for Wesley. But he can't let Vincent simplify further. He can't let him off the hook. He needs to keep some tension, give Vincent some difficult moves. He gives a check first, queen's off the board.
Oh my goodness. This is an endgame. Vincent Keimer now trying to get the rooks off the board, but that comes at the cost of a pawn on f6. Did he miss this?
I think he missed it. It was just instinct.
Did you see him? He touched his rook and then he hesitated. He was like, wait, I've just blundered a pawn.
Because he's got no time on the clock. He's trying to save his clock. And look at that, Wesley, he's about to go up a pawn right now. A gift by Keimer, who seems unsure on every single move. He pauses, puts the pawn on g5.
He's not out of it. His king is coming, the knight is coming. He's going to regain the pawn most likely, but it's just a matter of where the white king ends up. If by the time Vincent recaptures the pawn, the white king is already marauding up the center, maybe going left towards those black pawns. If the white king is active enough, Wesley, with a bishop in an open position, will have the advantage.
And the clock. It's all about the clock for Keimer right now. He can't go for any king-pawn endgames. The white king getting super active. He's trying to hold on with his knight and king at the center of the board, making sure the white king doesn't get too far out. 25 seconds.
This is move 35 incoming now. So 5 more moves to make before he gets that small consolation of the 1 second increment. But 98 e8 given a question mark, because maybe the white king can start running now.
White king can certainly make its inroads towards the queen side via c4, b5 and a6. So I'm expecting Vincent to hold firm as soon as the king stands up. Knight c7, try to block those squares.
And if Wesley is able to get this Armageddon game a win in, and we've got a result!
We do have a result, a win for Jujuna against Ju Wen Jun. What a game there. 3 points for Jujuna.
And about to deliver checkmate on that board, as well as black resigned defenseless against the idea of the rook stepping in, but it's back. It's all eyes on tournament leader Wesley So, trying to squeeze this one out, but makes a mistake, David.
He makes a mistake, and this king and pawn endgame is not winning for Wesley So. I think he's miscalculated. Again, he rushed. He had over 3 minutes. He didn't stop. He hasn't paused at all. Wesley's gone into a dead drawn king and pawn endgame. It's a race, but Vincent's moves are easy now. Vincent's just got to run. He's just going to push his pawns. We're going to see a drawn queen endgame, and Wesley stopping too late. This is so unprofessional from Wesley. He didn't pause.
And what's the point of having 2.5 extra minutes on the clock? This is the line that he had to calculate. He's slowed down now, but it's too little, too late.
Well, we see king takes pawn, and now it becomes a question. Can Vincent play the moves fast enough? Because let's not forget that Vincent is only getting a 1 second increment per move.
And both are going to queen at the exact same time. Wesley So will have an extra pawn on the board, but it is Vincent to move. Look at the speed with which he's playing. Vincent Keimer trying to get some extra seconds, build up on that extra second post move 40 right now. A tough save still, I'd say, for an Armageddon.
It's still tough. Vincent actually did go slightly wrong. He could have got to a dead drawn position. Here, it should be a draw, but he's suffering. The trick for black is to actually try and get the king into the corner. The queen centralized first. Vincent, mere seconds left. Wesley, odds are he still wins this. Although Vincent has memories now of a queen and pawn endgame against Gukesh all the way back at the beginning of the tournament, where he was on the winning side and couldn't win.
And Wesley, you could see it, his hands trembling before he came back with the queen, giving that check to the black king. Just the tension and the nerves and the stakes of this match incredibly high for the tournament leader right now. The king getting closer to that white lone pawn. He's about to double down. He gets the king forward.
And now Wesley is just looking for the most surprising moves to make in order to make Vincent burn that time on the clock. There you go, no more checks, just offer trader queens, make Vincent think, and here we go, mistake.
Oh, it's a mistake because white can now get the queens off the board. He can give a check in the center with his queen, the only winning move. And
he misses it!
He misses it. Oh, the bar's still high, but that was a knockout on the spot. Queen to d5, and the queens would have come off.
That was game over. The next move would have forced a queen trade. Vincent gets another life. Can't take it. He comes back.
And the clock. Vincent loses on time. Tough defense ahead, but Wesley gets the job done. That was such a nervy encounter from both sides.
Nervy encounter in.
You touch the rook.
Let's listen in to the players.
The arbiter there stepping in, telling the players not to talk. Vincent just focusing in on one moment where he touched the rook. He said he touched it and only realized too late that he lost the pawn. And even though he got close to a draw there, close to a defense, it was Wesley always a bit on top, and the clock then did play the decisive role. Vincent, 7 games, 7 Armageddon, no luck yet.
No luck in the Armageddon for Vincent. Wesley walks away with 1.5 points, moves to 14 points. We did see a game finish between Zhu Jiner and Zhu Wenjun. Can we just see how that game actually ended?
And meanwhile, another result coming in, another Armageddon coming in as Anna Muzychuk Humpy ends in a draw as well. Anna Muzychuk, the Armageddon queen, can she once again work her magic?
Yeah, that game was not the most thrilling, very symmetrical for most of it. I think a very fair result that it was a draw. Just before we jump into Magnus against Pragg, as Jovanka requested, a very quick show of the final few stages between these two chairs. It was the white chair that won, Zhu Jiner, and she delivered what was about to be a checkmate against the black king. It all came down to, I think, this moment where she'd sacrificed. She got back in Zhu Wenjun, but she needed to find this move to paralyze white. Rook back to c3, and it's very hard for white to break through. But she started kind of drifting here. Didn't find a plan for black, just started moving around with her bishop. The white king now able to improve, the white pawn stepping forward, and there was nothing to do against this big attack. The black king left all on its lonesome, and here we saw a file open up. Rook to g3, a beautiful killer. The black king is simply trapped, and the final blow was here, the king sidestepping, check, and the other rook coming across, inevitable, almost a pre-move, rook to h7, checkmate. That's a mating net. The only way to prolong it would be to give up black's rook, but forced mate next.
Beautifully done there by Zhu Jiner in this one, but we have to rush over to Magnus's board. He's down to 5.5 minutes on the clock. 14 moves remain to be made in that game right now. It's maximum pressure on Magnus, although on the camera he looks incredibly chilled after giving a check.
He gives a check, and big decision for Pragg. Does he block, or does he just hide in the corner at the I was going to say at the cost of a pawn, but that would allow bishop check, a double attack. Can Magnus hold this?
I'm going to predict that Pragg hides in the corner, simply playing on Magnus's clock right now. Any other move, you go queen f7, you get into an endgame. You go rook f7, there's even a check on e8, or rook f1, more pieces coming off the board. Bishop f7 just doesn't feel tempting enough, coming in the way of your own pieces. You want that f3 check in the air. I say Pragg goes king h8 and plays for more here.
King h8, I love that move, tucking the king into the corner. If he wants to avoid the queen trade, I mean, is bishop f7 something as well to consider? Although it kind of feels a bit weird stepping away.
I think Magnus's intention against nearly everything is to play queen e5, although here may be the least tempting, because actually There are rook e8 ideas to trade off rooks, and black is still a pawn up in the endgame. So actually, yeah, bishop f7 might set that trap. If we show king h8, maybe now Magnus can play queen to e5 and bail out into an endgame where he's very active. Black's h-pawns don't make a great impression. Maybe it's just that difference that in this position, after the queen's come off, the black d-pawn is protected, so rook e8 possible.
And the black bishop on h5 isn't hanging as well in these positions. So, Ivanka, I'm with you. I wanted to go king h8 to keep the game going, to keep the queens on the board. But if bishop f7, no matter how weird it looks as a retreating move, stopping, blocking your own f line, you know, no more bishop f3 checks, if that's the way to keep the queens on the board, I'd say Pragg finds it and he plays it.
It's that kind of move, right, that the Indian school of chess is so good at finding. It just breaks all the rules. And yeah, somehow it's based on calculation and it works. But bishop f7, king h8, Pragg thinking what to do. He can take his while though.
Also, can I make an argument that the move queen to f7, you know, if you trade, I'm saying that I have an extra pawn in that endgame. I still have something to play for, and I don't believe you can go for the pawn on h6 with the queen set up to give a big check on f3, hitting the king, hitting the bishop, queen f2, hitting the rook on e1.
Queen f3, probably the more accurate of the two, as you point out there, Tanya. So queen f7, definitely possible. Pragg, I think it is a choice between queen f7, maybe a bishop f7. What do we say, though? Is this a 2-result game? Because I can't see Magnus winning this ever, really. So is it just Magnus fighting for a draw, but Pragg playing for a win? Very least a draw.
You know, I think I'm going to say it's going to be a draw.
Another Armageddon? Mm-hmm. Very likely this one goes down to the wire. And let's remind everyone that Praggnanandhaa did take down Magnus in the earlier encounter in the classical at Norway Chess.
It's definitely decisive, because there've already been 2 classical draws, and I need this one. I need it. Come on, Pragg.
Yeah, I'm also looking at it and I'm thinking that there's not going to be any more decisive games apart from Divya Dishmukh, Bibisara Saubeva, which if we look in the bird's eye view, that's gone on the same way that we were predicting, with white setting up this pin against the bishop on b6.
That's the bottom center board. Divya with a big advantage. We'll just, yeah, but in the meantime, Firouzja losing his advantage despite still being a pawn up against Gukesh on the top left. And yeah, Armageddon imminent on the bottom right there between Muzichuk and Humpikinaru.
That's coming up, and it's a big one, especially for Anna Muzichuk, who's really in the mix of things right now, chasing the leader. That's Bibisara Asubaeva, currently in a worse position against Divya, bottom row there, but it's all eyes on Magnus Carlsen, Pragg, and also Firouzja with a big turnaround there. Should we quickly jump onto Divya and Bibisara before we head back to Magnus's game?
Let's go there, because it's a marquee matchup. If Bibisara wins this one in classical, it feels like she's running away with the tournament. If Divya wins, she will overtake. And, well, we are in for a wild ride.
Yeah, Divya's done everything right so far, everything perfect. Giving back that extra pawn earlier that she had, just to create this beautiful bind. It's so instructive, so classy what she's done. And, yeah, this pin, we said it was eternal. Here, Bibisara has found a way to defend her bishop. So maybe trying to get the queen out the way eventually, but that might come at the cost of some material. I don't see immediately how Divya improves the position. That is the big question. I was wondering whether she can play moves like queen a5, some funky stuff to try and double down, triple down on this pin to try and get a favorable endgame. If the queens come off, white probably in the driver's seat winning. But yeah, there are lots of twists and turns ahead, it feels, with the clocks ticking down.
And the more you look at queen a5, or at least the more I like it right now, you take that queen, you pick up the queen, the d6 pawn is hanging, the bishop on a5 hangs, and it's definitely got to be a move that has to be on Divya's radar, because Bibisara has set up the untangling of her own pieces, if allowed. Give black one move, queen falls back to e8 or d7, and you're quite happy. You're starting to advance on the right flank as well, you know, f4 coming in, f4, f3, queen h5, queen h3.
Yeah, can you not also... Yeah, I realized now you were talking for black. I was like, you go knight takes bishop and then rook takes d6. Also, this is like an idea that white has in the back of their pocket, but definitely black is getting active.
Yeah, maybe black has to go via d7 and the long way round. So maybe white should just be taking some time. I think tactically she should at some point give her king some breathing space. I'm not sure, h3, g3, h4, you name it. But yeah, Divya burning some time that she doesn't really have right now, 11 minutes on the clock.
And Divya is a player who doesn't enjoy time pressure. She's rarely the one who's chasing on the clock. She usually is the one putting pressure on the clock, and right now coming down to about the 11-minute mark. She moves her queen to the other side of the board, trying to get it to h5. She's identified that all of black's forces are on the left flank with the king left open there. Queen h5, queen f3 ideas. And queen f3 will not only hit the pawn on f5, but also threaten a deadly knight f6 check.
Ooh, sneaky tactics in the air. Bibisara under severe pressure on the board. She's a very resourceful player, so what can she come up with next?
You really want to move your queen away, don't you, if you're black right now? This is the opportunity to finally free up your pieces so that they can move around. The question, where do you go? d7, also supporting the f5 pawn.
Yeah, maybe d7, then the bishop has to retreat to d8. Full retreat mode just to get out of these pins, but yeah, very difficult to call here, Bibisara.
Big update, Pragg did take a decision on his board, and we'll just jump straight into that after the check. As we mentioned, no queen trades. He slides to the right side, king h8 on the board. Or not yet.
Not yet. Still
not
thinking.
yet.
Still thinking, it looks like, from Pragg. We see on the camera there, the king's still on g8, still check. It looked like he was about to move, though. So we will be seeing that move soon. But he's trying to spend time to look ahead into the future. He's not getting impatient here to make moves and pressure Magnus on the clock. That will come later.
No decision yet on this one. Ooh, and we're getting a confirmation here. Indeed, no moves by Pragg. The king still on the check, Yovi.
The king is still on the... Well, okay, suddenly we've arrived
predicted the future.
King to h8. Yes, you called it, Tanya. The most natural move. Yes, of course, it is being played. And here we were considering Magnus's plan. Just drop the queen back one square, offer up a trade. And Magnus doesn't have too much time.
I'm just assuming that move because it is the endgame great that is Magnus Carlsen, the endgame goat. I just assume he's going to try and get the queens off because it is a bit scary for the white king to be facing this check, the black queen coming in with some checks as well. You don't want to risk too much, but okay, we were half right there. He swaps off something, but it isn't the queens, it's the rooks that he wants to get off the board, and that does make sense too. The white queen is very active, black queen not yet so. So he wants to get the rooks off, and I think he's still angling for some kind of repetition, if possible.
Yeah.
Pragg has to decide, rooks off or not.
Magnus definitely wants to take this into the endgame if he can. He wants to take it to the Armageddon if he can. First the rooks, no more bishop f3 check. The d5 pawn under fire right now for Praggnanandhaa. How does he keep the game going, putting pressure on Magnus's clock? I do spot a check. There is the queen getting into the second rank. I'm also hitting a bunch of pawns on the left side. Is that worth considering right now? Although it's a bit terrifying leaving my king side completely free with checkmating ideas around the 8-7 square.
Definitely possible to consider that. Magnus, I guess, will hide out on h3. Something he should have done against Wesley in the game he lost. Something he did do against Firouzja in the game he won. The king for Magnus. He takes so many risks with his king. So many liberties. He prioritizes other stuff and just hopes to survive and the king active in the endgame. But yeah, it does look like it will survive there for at least the short term.
Yeah, well, very interesting decision there from Magnus to offer up a trade. Idea is just to simply swap rooks, and then the pawn on d5 is the ultimate target. So it also begs the question, like, will Pragg accept that trade, or will he simply go rook to d8 or something to try to keep everything tightly under control? Just while Pragg is thinking about this decision, let's take a peek in Alireza Firouzja against Gukesh, because Alireza still a pawn up, but the evaluation bar telling us it's completely level. What's happening here?
You know, there's a check on the board, so Gukesh will move the king away. I think the problem for Alireza is that his rook is kind of stuck where it is, right? With the black knight threatening to come into c3 to win that a2 pawn. You need to make sure that threat isn't possible. The big question, after Gukesh does sidestep with the king, can Alireza have enough time to go rook a6 and pick up that pawn in the position that's the a3 pawn here?
Yeah, he would love to. If he removes that pawn and re-centralizes his rook, reactivates it, he's just winning. But there will be counterplay based on this very strong knight on e4, and the fact that the white pawns can't really kick it away. Like, this construction of f2 g3 is normally very nice defensively, apart from against the knight. Like, I've had this myself many times, and if you touch the f pawn, the g3 pawn falls. if you don't touch anything, the f2 pawn, the base, is hit, and the black rook is coming into c2. So rook takes pawn, for example, rook is c2, impossible to defend both of these two little foot soldiers here, but knight c5 is another option, and I think the theoretical view is that these types of positions very drawish, especially because the white king is so passive. The black rook can sit behind, it can even just sit already behind the white pawn, and white's never really going to win this. He goes the other way in the live board. Gukesh with his king probably doesn't change too much, and yeah, he's open to more checks, but he's happy with that. This feels like it should be a draw. I think Alireza, at some point, the only winning attempt might be to bring his own king.
Your knight is paralyzed, your rook can't move because of the lines that you're suggesting. Rook a6 feels tempting, but it allows counterplay on the c file. The knight can't move because the black rook comes in on b1 and on b2, which means it leaves you with the d pawn moving forward or king to f1. These are the two options going through Alireza's mind right now. How committal does he want to get? d5, you're kind of putting it under fire. Rook d8, rook b5, lining up against that pawn. Feels like it will be defenseless there and a bit too rash.
Yeah. The white pawn is defended. I think leave it there for now. It's never bypassing the d6 square anyway, so I think he has to play king f1 unless there are any tactics. I don't really see how the black rook gets active yet. Maybe it is that